Welcome aboard. Glad you could join us today because we're going to be talking about boat maintenance. You know, a lot of you think that the type of thing that David's doing here, the sanding and the varnishing, is the only maintenance that has to be done to a boat. Well, it's true, it's important. That's the cosmetic part of it. And we'll be going back and forth to it quite often while we're trying to get this old boat into shape. But there's some other very important parts you have to know about. Routine maintenance to keep the boat afloat. Starting with the bottom up. The through hulls, very important. Seacocks, all the plumbing, all the fluid lines in the boat. In fact, we're going to show you how to rebuild a head, how to rebuild a water pump. Then we're going to go through the electrical and all the mechanical. These aren't the things that you wait until something goes wrong to fix. These are the things that you have to keep after constantly because the marine environment is very hostile. If there's any slight problem with a boat, water just can't wait to get in. That salt air, that environment can't wait to corrode what you've got. So you've got to watch your marine terminals. You've got to check your plumbing. You've got to check all your fittings. You've got to keep after your wood. You just got to do your routine stuff. We're going to get through all of that in the tape. We've got some good people to help us. David here is going to help us with our sanding and our varnishing segment. We've got Tom Kilpatrick helping us rebuild the head and the water pump. Got a lot of things to show you. So let's get started right at the bottom. We're going to work our way from the bottom up, starting with the through hulls of the boat.
Telephone line 1, telephone line 1.
If you've seen our cruising guide tape, you'll remember Dan Burns' #1 priority. Keep the water out of the boat. Now that may be easier said than done because if you've got a boat that's at least in the 30-foot range, you'll probably have more than a dozen holes in your hull. Some of them will be on or above the waterline as outlets for your sinks, bilge pump, refrigeration, shower sump, and cockpit drains. The ones below the waterline are usually for your head intake and discharge and also for the engine's water cooling intake. Of course, there might also be a couple more for your knot meter and depth sounding transducers, but as you'll see later in our program, they're usually of a non-corrosive material like plastic and can easily be serviced from inside the boat. The ones below the waterline deserve special care because if one of them goes, it's goodbye boat. Oh, by the way, if you're installing a marine head, don't forget to place the exhaust through hull farther towards the stern than the intake through hull. Now, the reason for this should be obvious, but every once in a while we see someone who forgets this principle until they use the head while underway and wonder why they seem to be continually haunted by what they're trying to flush out of the boat. Below the waterline intake through hull should be fitted with some sort of strainer device to keep debris out. And as you'll see later on, every through hull should have some device attached inside the boat so that it can be turned off in an emergency or for maintenance or repair work. If you're not using through hulls made of one of the newer wonder materials like Delrin, you should know about electrolysis, what it does and how to fight it. It can eat up your through hulls and your zincs just like the water's eating up this piece of Alka-Seltzer. Gordon West, our resident electronics expert, has a pretty good explanation of it.
Electrolysis is stray current corrosion, a improperly installed anchor winch, an improperly installed voltage converter, something where you require good size wires going to a battery, but you don't put in good size wires, and current will now flow not only through the black battery lead and the red battery lead, but when you have improper wire sizes, the current will probably flow from your underwater metals and back into the protected piece of equipment. And this underwater current flow, called electrolysis, will quickly eat up one of those underwater metals.
What about a dock neighbor whose power cord may be dangling in the water, even though it's insulated with a thick rubber housing? Will that have an effect?
If the thick rubber housing is intact, generally it will have no effect on your particular vessel. However, if any of that power cord should become damp enough that current then begins to flow along the skin of the rubber, then you might have stray current corrosion, and an improperly moored vessel next to you with a severe case of electrolysis will greatly affect your vessel as well.
One of the main problem areas on any boat is the marine head. We use two of the most popular models for illustration today. First, Tom Kilpatrick will talk to us about heads in general, some do's and don'ts, and troubleshooting the common problems. Then we'll join Mike Bennett in the workshop portion of his repair yard for a systematic, complete breakdown of another model, and then hopefully putting it all back together with no spare parts left over when we're done.
Marine heads are one of the 7 wonders of the modern world, and on yachts they're probably number 1 as a source of aggravation and trouble. But some of these problems can be easily avoided if we have proper installation, preventive maintenance, and just good common sense. I'd like to go through some of the problems that are encountered, and let's have some do's and don'ts regarding marine heads. Don't put anything in the marine head that can cause stoppage, such as paper towels, feminine hygiene products, cigarette filters, cigarettes, paper clips, bobby pins. Any one of these objects can cause a real problem. In addition, when you're cleaning your head, do not use any pine oil products or kerosene-based cleaners, as these will deteriorate the rubber seals and gaskets within the head itself. Use a normal cleaner such as Bon-Ami or any one of the normal bathroom cleaners, but avoid the oils and the pine oils. Do post a sign on the head that gives adequate instructions for the use of the head, and if landlubbers come aboard, be sure that the skipper instructs them on the proper use of the head so that you can avoid problems. Do also, if possible, use a special toilet paper made for marine heads that disintegrates very easily and is biodegradable. You should make sure that once in a while that you lubricate the external moving parts of the head with a little Vaseline. Don't use normal grease because that, again, can cause problems with the rubber gaskets and seals. There are numerous types of heads. Some are manual, such as this one. Others are electrically operated. Some go overboard. Some go into holding tanks. And then there's a combination of the above. If you use a 3-way valve, you can have the waste go directly overboard or have it go into a holding tank. As long as we're talking about holding tanks, let's go into the maintenance of a holding tank. It's a very good idea occasionally to put a deodorant in your holding tank and pump it as often as possible. Every time you go to sea, be sure and pump it out. Deodorant is usually obtainable at your local marine store and is not expensive, and again, we want the boat to smell nice and sweet. Let's go into some of the problems that are normally encountered in heads. One is clog at the flapper valve. If someone used too much toilet paper or foreign objects lodged in the flapper valve, it's necessary to take the head apart, clean the flapper valve, reinstall it, and clear the blockage. The second area that we look for is the duckbill valve. It's on the exhaust side of the system. It's rubber and looks very much like a duck's bill. And we will explain when we rebuild the head what it looks like and how to fix it. The next place we look for blockage is usually in the anti-siphon loop or any sharp corner that a hose takes. So this can be remedied by undoing the hose clamps, which is a messy job, but has to be done sometimes, and blowing the pipe out with water pressure or whatever else is available. Sometimes it's a good idea to keep a small snake aboard that plumbers use for this use. When all else fails, it will probably be necessary to rebuild part or all of the head assembly. And a rebuild kit such as this can be purchased at your local marine store. Be sure and get the proper number or model number off your head so that it matches the rebuild kit, because even on the same brand name there are numerous models. So again, get the proper rebuild kit. Assuming we have a rebuild kit available, then we're going to need some adequate tools. This is sort of a handy little tool kit that's available at most retail tool places. Not expensive. It has most of the tools that you'll need to rebuild the head.
Now that Tom's given us a general idea about what makes a marine head tick, along with some do's and don'ts and how to troubleshoot the most common problems, let's join Mike Bennett at his repair facility where we'll get some additional details on seacocks, anti-siphon loops, and we'll also see how to systematically break down a different model marine head, rebuild it, and put it all back together again. If you've got a boat that has a head on it, you will have trouble with your head. And most of the trouble is usually caused by two main things. One is misuse. It's very difficult to have everybody on the boat use the head properly at all times, especially when you've got different people, different guests, different crew, people who aren't familiar with boats. They think it's like a house. You just flush it and that's the end of it. The other thing is corrosion, especially if you're in a saltwater atmosphere. It's a very hostile environment. And the salt and the calcification can just destroy different parts of the head. The main part of the head is porcelain. Of course, this is the coverage. This is very similar to the type you'd have at home in your head there, which we don't need for maintenance purposes at this particular time. As you'll notice, this head is not in a boat. We've removed it. And if you want to have more room to work, you'll probably want to take the head out of your boat. Here's a few things to watch out for. First of all, starting at the bottom of the boat, there must be a way for fluid to get into the head and for it to get out of the head. So you'll probably want to start out with a through hull. This is a plastic one, so it won't usually corrode. And depending on the thickness of your hull, this is how you'll have it tightened and fastened. Attached to this will be, on the inside of the boat, hopefully you'll have one of these, because if you just try to attach the hose or your head or anything directly to it, you're going to wind up very big problems. Some form of seacock or gate valve, which fastens right on here inside the boat. And then, to this end of the seacock or gate valve will be your hose barb, because you have to have now some way to attach your hose to it for your plumbing, whether it be the head, the sink, or whatever else you're working with. So that just screws right in here. When we're not on camera, it screws in perfectly. When we're on camera, nothing works right. And then, of course, you're going to put your hose on. This is a hose clamp. Incidentally, always use stainless steel hose clamps, and don't be misled by the package that says stainless steel hose clamps, because a lot of times the clamp part itself will be stainless steel, but the screw won't. There will be some part on that is not stainless steel, and that will wind up rusting on you and possibly break off. The best way to do it, if you're going to check it for sure, is carry a small magnet with you. Even if you have a small compass, you can take it with you. That'll do it. And just put the compass or whatever you have in your pocket next to the package, away from the rack it's hanging on. And if you see the needle move or if the magnet's attracted to it, you'll know you haven't got a 100% stainless steel hose clamp. The hose clamp goes around the hose, of course. What a better place for it to go. And onto the hose barb. And then it gets tightened. And don't forget, always when you're tightening a hose clamp in a boat, make sure that the head of the screw on the hose clamp is at a place where it's accessible, because a lot of times people will tighten things on and they'll wind up with it upside down. When they want to loosen it, there's no way they can get the screwdriver in. So always make it to a point where you can get that screwdriver in. It is accessible. And if you really want to play safe, and this isn't necessarily on engine parts, because don't forget, this is something that can absolutely sink your boat, no doubt, if it breaks off. Double hose clamps, always. 2 hose clamps, safest thing in the world. Getting back to the head, if you want to take it off of the boat, remember, these particular through hulls attached to this, let me see if I can get a view of it in here without the hose on it, has a lever on it. And this lever will stop or allow the water to go through. This is called a seacock. And if I turn this in the right direction, it has a ball in it. And now I've got it open. And as you can see, this is the open direction, meaning this will be the flow of the water. When you want to close it, you'll turn it this way, and let's see if we can get the action. If you can see it close, that shuts it. Check these things periodically. When you have a boat, always go to your head, go to your through hulls, go to your engine through hull, your sink through hulls. If you've got seacocks on them, occasionally turn them, work them. Make sure that they function properly, because if it's open and you want to shut it for any reason, for any emergency, and you reach down and it won't turn, it means it hasn't been worked, it's seized up, it's galled up on you, and it's a very bad situation. So getting back to removing the head from the boat, the first thing you do is take a look and see which way your seacock is, and make sure it's turned off completely. Then when it's turned off, then you can loosen your hose clamps, and then you can lift off the hose. And when you lift it off, don't forget there will probably be some residue fluid in there, whether it be the intake or the exhaust. Just lift the hose up, and then get yourself a small bucket or something like that. You can pour it out, and then you can let the hose go down. if you're going to release it from that end. You'll probably be wanting to take it off from the business end of the head. Same thing, there'll probably be some residual fluids in. You'll want to dump them out into a separate little bucket so they don't go down into your bilge. Now once you've done that, at least you've taken off the connections to the hull from the head, and if you want to, at that point, you can start to disassemble the head and take off the big parts, get it out of the boat, at least out of the head, where you have a place to work on. It'll be a lot easier then. Next thing we're going to do after that is we're going to go down to the base of the bowl, base of the head. We're going to loosen 4 screws down there to give us a little more room, and we're going to take the top off from these 4 screws right here. All right, as you can see, as we've tilted the head over a little bit, we've pre-loosened all of these nuts and bolts because they have a knack of tightening up and freezing up on you whenever you're on camera. And we're prepared to lift the bowl off right now. And notice there's a gasket in here. You don't want to lose that. Incidentally, when you're working on a head, at least at this stage, you're still in the boat. There's always a possibility of some moisture, and your tools can slip, you can skin your knuckles, you can drop things in the bilge where they don't want to go, and it's not the best way to work. So don't be a bull in a china shop. Take your time, go slow. Incidentally, when you remove these hoses from these connections, if you want to take the bowl away, if you're worried about where it goes back to, just take a little grease pencil and mark A, and B, and C, and if you can't figure out how to put it back together again, maybe one of your kids can, because they're really good at those things. Just tell them it's a toy. Mike, if you want to put that away for us for just a second. Incidentally, in this particular model head, which with the WC, I see that's a Wilcox. This section right here is directly underneath the bowl. Or this is off to the side, the guts. On some of them, they're directly underneath. It doesn't make any difference. They've all got mostly the same parts, and what you'll probably have when you try to rebuild your head is a head kit. No matter what kind of head you've got, you can probably go to the neighborhood ship store and buy a kit which has the essential parts that you'll need to replace, and it'll have a great big diagram, and it'll be step by step. So just take your time, don't skin your knuckles, don't sink your boat, give yourself some room to work, and it won't be too difficult. Incidentally, this is where it was bolted down inside the boat, these 3 places right here. So naturally we had to undo those to bring the whole unit out here. Now we've got the bowl off, we've got it set aside, and taking Mike's instructions again and his advice, we've loosened up this section area. What do you call this area here, Mike?
It's the pump assembly.
The pump assembly, that's what it looks like to me. All right, now we disassemble the parts of the head to remove 2 important one-way valves. On the intake side, there are usually 2 of them. One's underneath the piston assembly, and the other one is here at the inlet side. It's called the inlet flap valve, and it's one of the valves that's nicknamed a flapper valve. And we just take it out because that's going to be replaced. Of course, on the exhaust side, we've got the backwater check valve. People have several nicknames for this one. Tom refers to it over again as the duck-billed valve. Most other people call it a joker valve. Each one of these valves allows material to flow in only one direction. They're both usually contained in any rebuild kit you might buy, and it's always a good idea to replace them periodically because these rubber parts are the ones that usually go first. Okay, here's where it gets tricky. The problem is with this particular head, as Mike explained to me, this is not generic. This is a part that's specific to this head only. And as you can see, the way it's shaped, this can go on either way, and you can really get totally confused. So whatever head kit you're using, please use the diagram. And if you have any questions, if you have any doubts, before you start to take things apart, you can take your little marking pencil and make a little matching mark here and a little matching mark here. Mark your gaskets, mark your pieces. Don't be afraid to do it. Once we get it all apart, most of these pieces that are the rubber pieces, I understand, are the ones that get replaced in the head rebuild kit. So don't worry about your little rubber pieces and your gaskets and your joker valves. They will be replaced. And once you get everything apart, then you just clean it out as good as you can clean it out. And if you haven't done what I've done before Mike caught me, your screws will be sorted next to the pieces where you're going to need them. In fact, if you really want to play it safe, you know you're going to be putting a new joker valve in. So have the new joker valve ready, and the screws that come out where the old joker valve was, put it where the new joker valve is, so then you can just replace it and all the screws are next to each piece. Mike showed us the similarity between the pump assembly shaft on a marine head and the stuffing box where a prop shaft goes through your boat's hull. They each probably have a packing gland, which should also be replaced periodically to avoid leakage. Here, Mike is removing this head's packing gland. You'll see how to replace it in just a minute or so when Mike reassembles the head. I'll also tell you something very important on this. When you're all through with the head, make sure that the lever is on the pump dry position, because I've been on several boats and I've seen that after somebody uses the head, they'll leave it in the flush position, and what happens is it does not break the siphon, and the water continually keeps coming in after they've stopped flushing, and over a period of time it will sink the boat, especially if you leave it unattended for any period of time, if it's in a slip or at a pier or at a marina. Now, you know what I'm going to ask you to do.
You're going to ask me to put it together, huh?
Right, and you have 30 seconds, Mr. Houdini.
Okay, we're going to put this head together. This is a Wilcox Crittenden 1460, otherwise known as a headmate to those of you who have one. I'm going to start with the pump assembly, and I start usually with the O-ring because it's small and easily lost, and I coat it with a little bit of white grease, keeps it lubricated, goes in the hole like that. All right, next thing to go in is the shaft assembly, and that takes this strange looking object which is called a vacuum breaker. As we put the vacuum breaker assembly in, we get it lined up and push it through, and then as you see there's two little countersinks in the screw holes, and then we put the two screws in. See, that will work just fine. Put the spring in, clips into place, and then this little plastic head thing goes like this. There we are. So the vacuum breaker handle protrudes through. Of course, this is particular to this toilet. We put this nodule in here and it goes on like this. And then this assembly goes on here like this. And then these 6 screws go in. And we take the screwdriver and we screw them down. So do one corner and then the next corner, and so on and so forth. And then as a final precaution, just tighten all of the screws. Don't over tighten the screws or you'll crack the plastic. Oops. Did you hear that?
Here's a business end view of a marine head's main piston assembly in action. It goes up and down just like in an automobile motor. When you reassemble the head, make sure you slip a new piston ring onto the groove of the piston's outer diameter. It's like sort of doing a new valve and ring job on your car. Next, tighten the piston rod retaining nuts. It's kind of tough to do by hand, so you'll probably find it a lot easier to use either 2 wrenches or 2 pliers for this part of the operation. After it's all tightened up, insert it into the cylinder housing of the head, and then you're all ready to replace the packing gland material. We'll leave that part to Mike.
We put the gland packing, which is a spiral of packing, over the rod and down the hole.
Right there. Okay.
Press it in with your finger. If you want to tap it down with a screwdriver, that's fine too. The gland nut, which goes down over here, and that sort of tightens down the packing and finger tight. And then, of course, the handle. Better to be safe than sorry, we'll put a big dollop of grease inside it, because it is aluminum, and stainless steel and aluminum in a saltwater atmosphere do tend to grow together. And just hold the shaft with a pair of pliers just to get a sort of final tighten. That completes the pump assembly. Now, let's put on the joker valve. Joker valve goes in this housing here, and we've impregnated the joker valve with white grease, which keeps it supple. Then I insert the screws that hold this assembly on, and I'll show you an interesting fact once they're tightened up. Now this bottoms out and is tight, and see, you can turn this because it's slipping on a piece of rubber. So if your hose is slightly out of alignment when you put it back in the toilet, don't worry about it. Even with these screws tight, you can still turn the joker valve assembly. And that's true for most heads, unless it's been sitting for a long, long time. Okay, we come to our base. Now, remember, this is the check valve. The weight comes so it points down and has to lift up. Again, I like to coat it with grease. It helps seal and, of course, keeps the rubber from getting cruddy because this calcium scale does not like to build up on a greasy surface. that fits in quite nicely into the little channel, and this is sort of typical of most toilets. And then the pump assembly goes on, as you can see, like this. And now we come to putting the bowl back on. Here's the bowl. So we pull the gasket and put it on this surface here. This gasket is actually an old gasket, but they do not normally leak. And then you put in these screws. Now, this hose here goes on here, and the assembly is finished. Now, when it's back in the boat, we will tighten this if it leaks a little bit. Okay, and you're back to square one.
Unlike marine heads, whose main purpose is the efficient removal of material from the boat, you also must have some method of pushing water through the boat. This is accomplished with the use of the marine water pump. And, like any other part of a boat that has moving parts, it'll also give you troubles that you should know how to recognize and deal with.
If you've got a boat that's bigger than 16 feet and it's got any water inside the boat other than the stuff that leaks in, you'll probably have a water system and some water pumps. They usually fall into about three main categories, other than the mechanical pumps, which we won't get into in this tape because it's beyond the realm of the average boat owner. Should be taken care of by an experienced repairman. You have your impeller pumps and your diaphragm pumps. Now, your impeller pumps, for the most part, like Tom has there, can you hand me that one, please, Tom? This is an old impeller pump. Not being a pro, I put my fancy glove on, sort of like Michael Jackson. This is an impeller pump. Inside here is the impeller. They always go bad, and the reason they go bad is because the impeller usually loses its integrity. The rubber usually cracks, bends, or breaks. Another kind of pump, which is the most popular one, is going to be your diaphragm pump. Your diaphragm pump usually will take care of your fresh water system on the boat for your galley. The impeller pumps will usually take care of hose down, salt water, engine cooling. What else is it used for, Tom? Shoot some suggestions at me.
Bait tanks.
Bait tanks.
Freshwater washdowns.
Freshwater washdowns. Okay, so those are the two basic types. I think that the most popular we want to get to first will be the diaphragm type pump. And if you have a failure with your diaphragm type pump, first thing to do is check your belt. Can you hand that to me, please, Tom? You have a small fan belt on it. It's called a fan belt, but it doesn't go to a fan. It's the kind you usually see on your cars. That's this thing right here. Check it first. See if there is a belt at all, and if there is one, if it's loose. Major problems you get with these pumps is either you get no pump action at all, or the pump fails to shut off after you turn off the faucet on your fresh water system. One of the reasons for that is because there's a diaphragm in here, which we're going to get to when we break it down. And if there's a pinhole in the diaphragm, it won't get up to the approximate 15 pounds per square inch that it's metered to bring your pressure up to. And if it doesn't get up to that point, then it'll just keep pumping because it automatically shuts off when it reaches that desired pressure point. So the first thing you want to do is check your fan belt, or your motor belt rather. If your belt is okay, check your electrical system. See if you've got any shorts. Check your circuit breaker or your fuse. If you've got power coming to it, and your test meter or whatever you use tells you there's power coming to it, and you see your belt is in shape, then you may have a problem with your diaphragm if it doesn't shut off, and if it does nothing at all, it may be the motor, or it might be this little switch right over here. We're going to get to all three of these things. We're going to break it down. We're going to show you how to put it back together again, and hopefully you'll be able to follow the instructions and do it on your own boat when the need arises, and save the very costly expense that somebody who's an expert costs when he comes over to fix your boat for you. So let's start out with the diaphragm pump.
And certain things do go wrong with these pumps. Probably the most prevalent is the pressure switch, which is right here. You can check that by disconnecting one of the wires and see if it stops or not. But if you have to replace it, it unscrews very easily. There's a nut right here that should be loosened. Then you just unscrew it, insert the new one, reconnect the wires, and you're back in business. The second thing to check is the tension on the belt. You can see that the pressure on the belt should be just firm. Should not be super tight and not loose, but just firm. You can see how much depression there should be, and that is locked in place by this nut right here. After this nut is tight, then retighten this nut over here, and your belt will be the correct tension. The third possibility is a pinhole in the diaphragm. If that's the case, it's necessary to disassemble the pump and replace the diaphragms. The first thing in this procedure is to loosen the tension on the belt with this nut so that we may remove the belt. Remove it from the bottom first. It'll come right off. Next step in the procedure is to loosen the bottom sheave, which takes an Allen wrench. We're going to unloosen it and pull it right off. You can see that there's an Allen screw right here, which is loosened or tightened, and on the shaft is an indentation that the set screw goes into when you reassemble the unit. The next step in the procedure is to loosen the 4 bolts that hold the diaphragm plates in place. After this Allen screw is removed, which releases the shaft or plunger that's connected to the diaphragm, the unit will come apart thusly. This bolt right here holds the diaphragm plates together. So this should be unscrewed from the shaft. This is the top plate, which fits here. This is the bottom plate with the bolt going through and the washer on the bottom, which fits on the bottom. This is the diaphragm that we're talking about and is easily removed from the unit. It's a good idea to keep one of these diaphragms aboard as a spare in case there is a pinhole in one. It's easily removed, as you could see, and the pump can be reassembled. The next step in the procedure would be to replace the bottom plate and conversely the top plate. After the new diaphragm has been put in place, it's then reassembled, tightening the nut firmly on the shaft assembly. Then reinserted into the frame and put back together the same as we took it apart. It's very important to try and tighten these evenly, not super tight, but just real firm. You don't want more pressure on one side than the other because really the diaphragm is a rubber gasket between the two, so you can tell by the tension of your wrench whether you're doing this evenly. Now that we have that reassembled, we can put our shaft back together. And remember, the idea is to line up the set screw with the hole, put the Allen wrench in place, and tighten it up. You can tell if you've hit the hole or not, because if you don't, the set screw won't go all the way in. Now we can put the belt back on, putting on the top pulley first because it has a lip on it. And then we turn this gently and you can see the belt slide on. Now we readjust the tension in the belt. You can see the adjustment here. So we come up again to where it's nice and firm, and then we retighten the locking nut. And that should do it. We've shown you how to do minor repairs on a diaphragm pump, but there is another kind of pump that you'll find around boats that does a little bit of everything. It supplies the salt water to your saltwater coolant and your heat exchanger and your engines and your generator. This is an impeller type pump. Now this one has been an awful lot of miles and it's about ready to be used as an anchor, but it'll at least give you an idea of what is inside in a typical impeller pump. I'm going to take this pump apart by first removing these screws from the end plate. And again, it's very important to put these screws in a place where they won't end up in the bilge. I'm removing the end plate, and you can see that this impeller has been in there a long time. Normally, what you do is carefully insert a screwdriver and gently, from all sides, remove the impeller. It may be necessary to use a lubricant, such as super wrench, to loosen the impeller. After the impeller has been removed, examine each blade for wear or cracks. I can see in this impeller that the rubber's old, and you can spot a crack right here. When an impeller such as this gets old, the rubber loses its resiliency, starts to crack, and should be thrown out and replaced with a new one.
Some marine heads can be worked manually without any motor, but all water pumps, along with your other 12-volt accessories, need a power source, and that will normally be your boat's battery system. Now, if you've got a really big boat like the Queen Mary, you can probably generate enough 110 electricity to light up an average city. But if you're like the rest of us, you should consider having two types of batteries on your boat. An engine battery used only for cranking her up, and a house battery to run all of your DC accessories. The best type for engine cranking is a starting battery. This one is designed to release energy quickly at a very high rate. A starting battery is composed of many thin lead plates that create a large surface area and allow for a higher energy output. But this high output can only be maintained for short periods of time because the thin plates can only store a limited amount of energy. Your house battery should be what we call deep cycle. It has fewer lead plates that are thicker than the ones on a starting battery. The deep cycle battery with its thick plates can be drained down to a low state of charge and recharged many times. Neither type of battery is well suited for the other's purpose, so if you try to use a deep cycle battery for engine starting or attempt to run your accessories off of a starting battery, you'll always be wondering why your batteries never seem to last as long as they should. No matter how many accessories you've got on board your boat, unless they're 110 working off a generator you have on board, they will work off the battery. This is the heart of your boat's electrical system. This one happens to have 6 filler caps on top. It's a 12-volt battery, and it'll power all of your accessories on the boat. Incidentally, they're usually rated by amp hours. An easy way to calculate the amp hours and the amperage draw is to divide the amount of watts by the amount of volts in the battery. For instance, if you have a 12-volt battery and you have a 12-watt light bulb, that will be a 1 amp draw. If you have a 24-watt light bulb or 24-watt power draw, that will be a 2 amp draw. So by calculating how many amps of draw you're using and comparing it to your battery, you'll see if you're under batteried or over batteried, but it's always good to have a bigger battery. Incidentally, you should always, if you have an engine or two on your boat, have separate banks of batteries. One should be only for cranking the engine, and the other should be your house battery for working your 12-volt accessories on the boat. So if you run things down by leaving your stereo on too long while you're at anchor at your favorite little cove, you'll still have some cranking power to turn your engines over. And of course, you can get a battery isolator that when the engine's running, it can charge the bank of batteries that needs it the most. Now, getting back to the battery, this is an 8D. It's probably a lot bigger than the one you've got on your boat. And incidentally, never try to carry these things by yourself. I mean, I don't think I could lift this if I could. It weighs about 200 pounds, so when we move it, we always use a battery dolly. And the important things to remember are that when you fill a battery, always use distilled water. The reason for that is you don't want to have a mineral deposit on the plates of the battery, and the distilled water supposedly doesn't have the minerals that are in it. And you never want to fill it past the point where they say to fill it. Don't think you're doing your battery a favor by filling it all the way up to the brim and letting it run over, because what happens is when it's charging and it's cooking, you're going to be losing your electrolytic fluid. And very bad, because it can hurt the battery in the long run. Also, be very careful when you're working with a battery, especially when filling it, because if it's undercharged, or if you're in dockside and you're on your 110 battery charger, it's cooking and it's bubbling, and it may splash, and there's acid in there, and you certainly don't want to get that in any part of your body, especially your eyes. Another good safety tip, and also good for maintenance, is this. It's just like the type of thing you buy in an auto parts store to clean your car battery. It cleans battery terminals. You can put it right on top, you can give it a couple of turns, and you'll see how shiny it makes it. Looks like it has an extra piece there. That's for doing the female part of it inside your terminals. But it cleans it off very nicely, gets all the corrosion off. Another thing very good to use are these marine terminals on the battery. They usually come on a card like this, and if you go into any boat store, you'll usually see some of them on the shelf. They're not too expensive. They're only $1 or so each. And the advantage is that in your car, if you ever want to disconnect your battery for any reason, you've got to get that wrench or that pliers and undo it. This clamps on very nicely, the same way, tightens up, but all your terminals, all your battery cables go onto this wing nut. So in the event you have some sort of emergency, and you want to disarm your battery quickly, just turn the wing nut, get it off, and you can take off whatever you want. The other thing is the hydrometer. As you can see, it's got the green, the white, and the red areas. What you do is you stick this into the battery, depress the bulb, and then when you release the bulb, it'll draw out the fluid from the battery and will make this float go up and down. This float will stop somewhere in the float level within the hydrometer, and according to the way it reads, it will say to you the battery is good, it is fair, or recharge it. It's very simple. It's not an expensive device, and you should always have one on your boat. Incidentally, there are so many of these maintenance-free batteries we see advertised that are good for cars that you never have to do anything with the water on. That's fine if you don't want to add water, but the other thing is if you can't open it to add water, you can't open it to test it with a hydrometer. So that's why most boat owners don't have the maintenance-free batteries. Very good to have. Another good thing to have is the old cookie baster. You can don't borrow your wife's, because after you stick it in the battery, I don't think you want to use it in the kitchen again. But the point is, when you're using your distilled water, it's much easier to dip this in, take the water out here, and fill it this way. Of course, they do have the automatic ones that shut off automatically when it's as high as it should be. I never got used to one of those. If you like it, you use it. All right, we've covered the battery terminals and the posts. Important thing is also a battery cover. Now, what we have here is a battery box designed for this particular battery. As you can see, it's plastic, it's closed all the way around, it's cut off on the edge so the cables can go through, but the most important thing is when the cover is on it, nothing can drop across the terminals. If the battery was uncovered, some things that were loose in your battery compartment were rolling around like a screwdriver, and it hit both terminals at the same time. I can see on the screwdriver, in fact, Mike's going to bawl me out for this one, I can see the scorch marks on the screwdriver. You can imagine what would happen if something big in metal was to go across both terminals at the same time and stay there while you're underway. So use the battery box, keep it covered, and keep it strapped down, because even though it's too heavy for you to carry, when that boat goes through some rough weather, and if your wife's watching, you know, you can tell her it's going to be very rare, but if it does go through some rough weather, that battery will bounce around, and you don't want that to happen. Here's another thing to remember. You know, most of the times you'll have some sort of panel on your boat, and with switches or fuses or circuit breakers telling you about running lights and house lights and battery chargers and bilge pumps. As a suggestion, wire 3 things directly to your battery and not through the panel. Those 3 things would be your automatic bilge pump, if you have one, and I certainly hope you do, your running lights, and your VHF radio. That way, if you have some sort of electrical problem on the boat and you must disarm your electrical system by shutting down your main panel, you'll still have your running lights to run at night. You'll still have your VHF radio to call for help or give assistance. And you'll still have your bilge pump working if you start to take water on. So wire those 3 things directly to your battery. And if you want to, you have your removable terminals. So if you want them attached to that, you can put them to your house battery, or you can move them over to one of the engine batteries while you're underway. Either way, but it's a good idea to wire those 3 things hot right to your batteries. A battery load tester isn't the type of thing you're bound to have on your own boat. Most boat owners don't have one, but possibly your local ship store might have one they can lend you, a local electronics store might have one, or anybody who comes to work on your boat might have one. And it's a good diagnostic tool. Only thing to remember is very important if you're using it by yourself with no one else around is the black cable goes to the negative. And right on the battery it will say neg and pos, and the red one goes to the positive. Once they're clamped on, you're in business, and the needle will go all the way up to show over 12 volts if your battery's functioning. We then have a switch right here on the tester. We then flick the switch, and we are then putting a load on the battery, and depending on how well the battery can stand the load, we'll have an idea what shape the battery's in. And this particular battery, it's not too bad. It says weak, as we indicated when we used our hydrometer. So this battery could use a little charging, but this is the load tester. That's how to use it. It's not very complicated. It's just a little expensive. Quite some time ago, a famous physicist formulated the theory that things normally fall down and not up. On a boat, the place that's farthest down is your bilge. And as the old-timers' theory shows us over and over again, just about anything on a boat can wind up down there. To avoid losing tools into the bilge or overboard, I use a string to tether the tool to my wrist. This style was originally invented by mothers to save children from losing their mittens. With most big objects like tools, we can usually fish them out with either a magnet or an extension grabber. But with little things like sawdust and leaking oil and dirt in general, we have no alternative but to tackle the messy job of cleaning out the bilge by hand. Ron Curry courageously volunteered to help us out on this portion of our program, and here he is going through that messy process we told you about as he shows us how to completely sanitize a bilge. There's really no shortcut when it comes to cleaning out a bilge. You just have to get down there and start. Our good friend Chuck Daly had recently purchased this old Chris Craft, and by the looks of it, you'd never believe that it was used by Elvis Presley in his 1966 movie Easy Come, Easy Go. Reports from the previous owner indicate that this old boat had been sitting in the slip for the last 8 or 9 years with no routine maintenance to speak of, so the bilge was about as dirty as a bilge can get. It would have been against the law to pump the oil out of the bilge, but Ron still wanted to see if the pump was in working order. It wasn't, but that was only because no power was getting to it. We did notice that it had an automatic flow switch, though, so it means that someone must have at least tried to do the right thing sometime during the past. Over the years, though, it looked like successive owners had each tried their hand at creative wiring, so the electrical mess had to be cleaned up before there could be any chance of getting a bilge pump to work. Of course, there were still several inches of engine oil which had to be taken out the hard way. Every time Ron filled up his container with oil, he made a trip over to the local gas dock where they had a disposal drum. After Ron spent the better part of 2 days in bailing and sponging out the black stuff, he decided to lay in some sanitary napkins. Boy, they really did the trick, like a blotter, and in no time at all the engine compartment was ready to be scraped out and hosed down with a bilge cleaning solution. Routine maintenance isn't something that's just done to the things you can see, like the varnish on the outside of the boat, or to the things that you use quite often, like your marine head and your water pump. If you're going to practice routine maintenance, it's got to be on parts of the boat that you can't see also, and the bilge is one of those places. Of course, when it gets this dirty, there isn't much to do other than the things Ron is doing, but you can stop it from getting this dirty. Check your bilge out periodically. If you see dirt down there, if you see an oil leak, if you see something down there that shouldn't be down there, clean it out as you see it. It should be part of your routine maintenance checklist. Of course, the job wouldn't be over without completely rewiring the bilge pump and float switch, replacing the hoses and clamps, and removing all the dead-end wires that no longer served any purpose. Just cleaning out the bilge wasn't good enough for Ron. He wanted to show us his definition of sanitary. So after the oil and dirt were all gone, he just kept right on going and painted the entire area. When he finished, it looked like a completely different boat. In fact, an old-timer who works on the docks here in Redondo Beach tells us that this bilge didn't look this good when it was brand new. Oh, by the way, there's another through hull on boats that have auxiliary engines. It's where the shaft goes through the hull. It's not often referred to as a through hull because there's no common through hull fitting that the shaft goes through. Instead, the shaft passes through a device called a stuffing box. This box contains material called a packing gland that sometimes can leak a little more than it's supposed to. If you go to either tighten it up or replace the gland material, you may find that your packing nut is frozen up. If it is, the best thing to do is completely saturate it with some penetrating oil. Wait a couple of hours and then try loosening it again. If you're lucky, sooner or later enough penetrating oil will do the trick. These stuffing boxes are designed to allow a few drops of water to trickle in each hour, so don't be disappointed if you never seem to have a completely dry bilge. And if you've got a sailboat, you can even go lower than the bilge. You should take your keel into consideration. On a nice fiberglass one like this that looks all smooth on the outside, the ballast is all internal. But some boats have external ballast and the keel is bolted on.
For those of you with a bolt-on keel, you'll find in your bilge a series of bolts, and this is called obviously a keel bolt. There is no maintenance possible with these inside a boat, and if you ever have to check them, you have to take the boat out of the water, haul it out, ground the keel on the ground because there's too much pressure on these bolts, so they always feel tight. If the burr which the keel bolt is sitting on, some boats have them, some boats just have a big washer, is rusty or rotten or corroded, you have to take the boat out of the water and ground the keel in order to undo the keel bolts. I'd like to show you some things on the bilge of this boat. This is a 61-foot CNC, and I know a lot of people don't get to see a lot of 61-footers. They're just the same as 21-footers, but just a little more complex. This is interesting. I see there's an awful lot of through holes in here. These are for the head intake and discharge, and these are speed and knot meter through holes because it's a racing boat. There's one on either side, so whichever tack, which means whichever side the boat is leaning on, they will always have one almost perpendicular to the water, which will mean it will give a more accurate reading than the one that's got a lot of turbulence on it. See this wire here? It's very interesting. When they installed it, they wrapped it with plastic, which is very good because it stops the wires from chafing, and this is the problem we find on maintenance. An awful lot of wires and hoses are chafing. They notched the longitudinal bearer of the boat to fit the wire like this, so that's very good. Oh, I see a problem here. See, there's a broken terminal right here that appeared to go on this through hole. Now, this is connected to the bonding system, and the bonding system in a boat connects all the underwater metals together to a sacrificial zinc. Here is another problem we find in bilges a lot, and in fact on your engine and everywhere. There's two hose clamps right here. If I can move this wire a little, there's two hose clamps. This is good. There's only one here. There should be two, but there's two here. You should always double clamp your fittings below the waterline, because if one clamp goes, as this one is just about to, you still have another one. However, I do want to point out that whoever put these hose clamps on in the past, the screw is rusty, and the chances are that it might not be a stainless steel screw. If you go to your auto parts store to buy hose clamps for your boat, be careful. Test them with a magnet and make sure the screw is non-magnetic, which means it's stainless. The other thing you can see down here that's of interest, and you don't see this in many boats these days, is this bronze chain. It's called a limber chain. Now, you may all have heard of limber holes in a bilge. Well, a limber chain is there so you can pull it backwards and forwards. It's spring-loaded at either end, and you can clean all the limber holes in the bilge automatically. It's a very, very good idea. On this particular boat, when before these were installed, they used to have water gathering in one bilge and it wouldn't drain because there was dirt in the bilges. But you can't stop them from getting dirty. I don't care how much you spend on cleaning your boat. Your bilges are going to get dirty because dirt, rust, condensation, dust, woodwork done anywhere, it all finds its way down into the bottom of the boat, and that is one of the problems with bilges. You have to keep them clean.
If you've got transducers in your hull for your depth sounder or your knot meter, they can be serviced from inside the boat, but be very careful when you do it. Pierre came down to the Magic Lamp to help us one day, and as you can see, when he pulls the through hull for our transducer for our depth sounder, a lot of water comes in. This should be a good warning for you to keep your through hulls serviced throughout the boat, because if they corrode and break, you're going to get a lot of wet stuff coming in the hull of that boat. Once you leave shore, the Auto Club can't help you. And with cutbacks in Coast Guard budgets, if you should happen to break down out there for any reason, you may have to pay quite a bit of money to a commercial company for a tow back to shore. This makes preventative maintenance the name of the game. Dave Stoll let us visit his engine distributorship in Wilmington to show you the basic steps of engine care. He didn't roll out any red carpet for us, but he did have his staff roll out a couple of shiny new engines, one gasoline and one diesel, which were much more useful to us than any carpet would have been. And most helpful was Mr. Tim Barrett, Dave's general manager.
This here is a Chrysler LM 318 cubic inch engine.
If you have a gas engine on your boat, with the exception of the cooling system, it's probably a lot like the gas engine you see in most automobiles. It also will require much of the same type of routine maintenance. The main difference is that there's no one to ask you if you want things checked under the hood when you have it filled up. You've got to check these things yourself, or they just won't get checked at all. This particular gas engine we're looking at is a Chrysler, the type usually found in boats like the Bayliner 25 or 30 foot models. Periodic maintenance on a gasoline boat engine, just like your car engine, calls for regular tune-ups, replacement of fuel and oil filters and spark plugs. Unlike an automobile engine, marine power plants don't have the luxury of a radiator in back of the grill, where the 50 or 60 mile per hour wind can cool things off. Instead, it sucks in cold seawater and runs it through a heat exchanger which cools the engine. This heat exchanger system will usually have a pencil zinc inside. That's a sacrificial piece of metal which is put there to be eaten up by any electrolysis you might encounter if your boat stays in the water for any length of time. So if you've got a pencil zinc, be sure to check it periodically and replace it whenever it wears down. And if your engine meets Coast Guard regulations, it will also have a closed fuel system with a vent leading back from the fuel pump to the carburetor. This way, if the diaphragm in your fuel pump ruptures, the gas won't go down and fill up your bilge. Instead, it will be rerouted up to the carburetor, which will then flood and stop the engine. This particular Chrysler engine has an electronic ignition, so there are no points or condenser to worry ourselves with, but that's no reason not to check everything else on a routine basis. You should also be aware of the location of your engine's emergency shutoff device. This motor has a red circuit breaker button or two, which when depressed will cut off power to the alternator or voltage regulator. If your engine doesn't have a red button like this, you should at least be aware of where on the boat the emergency fuel shutoff is. Your car engine has an alternator belt and a fan belt. Your boat engine has an alternator belt, and it also has a raw water pump belt that goes around the raw water pump, the crankshaft, and also around the circulating water pump. This belt, like the alternator belt, has about a 1/4 of an inch play in it. You should know the play in the belts in your own boat's engine, and also be sure to carry spare belts whenever you venture offshore. And don't forget to use your blower every time before you start those gas engines. We've already talked about belts and zincs in gas engines, and well, they also apply when it comes to diesel engines, so let's start out here with the 3 main requirements of any diesel engine: clean air, clean fuel, and clean oil. A diesel engine gulps a tremendous amount of air, so it should be able to get it without any strain. Under maximum speed and load conditions, you should be able to lift your engine hatch without difficulty. If you try to lift the hatch and feel some suction resistance, or notice that the RPM and speed both pick up when the hatch is lifted, that's a pretty good indication that your engine is being air-starved. Service your air cleaner regularly. Dust and dirt stick to oil even in a spotlessly clean engine room like yours. And consider installing a blower to force cold air to your air cleaner. That can improve your engine performance by as much as 15 to 20%. Clean fuel can turn into dirty fuel even while it sits in your tank. When the tank is low, residues, impurities, water from condensation, and algae reach their highest levels. Dirt and algae eventually settle at the bottom of the tank in the form of what we call sludge. And sooner or later, they'll do plenty of damage, so remember to keep your tanks topped off, use a proper fuel filter, and don't forget to clean the residue out of the sediment bowl each time you replace your water separator. Oil filters on a diesel engine are similar to those on gas engines, and their importance is just as great on the diesels. And speaking of oil filters, Tom Kilpatrick has located a new type that we're experimenting with here on the Magic Lamp.
This is called an oil bypass hot dome oil filter. All of the filters that come standard equipment with your engines, boat engines, whether they be gasoline or diesel, remove particulates from the lube oil. But this is the only one we've found that also removes fuel contamination and moisture from the lube oil. What that means to you is that with no moisture in the lube oil, sulfuric acid cannot develop, which is harmful to your rings, pistons, and moving parts of your engines. Without fuel contamination, the viscosity or thickness of the oil remains the same and does not deteriorate. Let me explain how this works. The oil comes out of your engine, normally through your oil pressure gauge, into the filter at this point. It goes down underneath, up through a disposable element within this filter housing, and then is atomized up into a hot dome in this area here. It's atomized under pressure, and that will flash off the fuel contamination and water contamination. The oil then comes out of the filter through this fitting, through a hose, back into the pan of your engine, and completes its circuit. It does this approximately 4 times per hour, which means that you have clean oil in your engine at all times, rather than having the oil deteriorate from clean oil to dirty oil between oil changes. Let me open it up here and show you what happens. Here we have a two-stage filter that is really, the first part of the filter takes care of particulates down to about 4 microns. The second part of the filter is an oil polisher which goes sub-micron in size. The oil is then funneled up through this aperture under pressure and atomized in this upper chamber, which entails a hot dome. That is powered by 12 volt. When the oil is atomized in this dome, the fuel and water contaminants are flashed off through this unit right here. The oil then continues its process down through here through a hose back into the pan of the engine. We're showing you this so that you can see what can be done to increase the life of your engine and the life of your oil. Theoretically, as we say, the oil should go forever. We're talking about normal oil changes on a diesel engine of about every 150 to 200 hours. We have been running this unit on boats that have gone better than 1,000 hours without an oil change, and the oil still looks as good as when it was first put in.
The bottom line when it comes to an engine starting battery is when you turn the switch, will the engine start? Really, that's the $64 question. Well, we're now using a device that not only indicates the battery's condition, but also shows you how many cold cranking amps it has. A new rating has been established by the International Battery Council to provide a measurement of battery power for engine starting. It's sometimes referred to as battery cold power, but it's abbreviated as CCA, which stands for cold cranking amps. Most battery manufacturers are adopting this rating system and label their batteries accordingly. This new cranking performance rating standard is defined as discharged load in amperes, which a battery at 0 degrees Fahrenheit can deliver for 30 seconds and maintain a voltage of 1.2 volts per cell or higher. Now, to use this tester, you must first disconnect the battery from any other batteries in the system. Then make sure that the volt switch is set to the number of volts that your system is, either 6 or 12. I don't think the tester works on 24 or 32 volt systems. If the dial doesn't read 0 before the test starts, there's a 0 setting button you can use. Next, set the cold cranking amps for the rating your battery is supposed to have. If you're not sure of your rating, the battery tester company supplies a chart you can use, and you can probably find your battery on it. Now you're all set to start testing. By turning the switch to volts, the dial tells us the level of charge in the battery, and as we can see, this 12-volt battery reads out pretty good. When we switch over to battery condition, the dial gives us an indication of condition by comparing the level of the battery's present cold cranking amps to the number of cold cranking amps that the battery is actually rated for. This is in the form of a color readout of whether or not we should replace the battery or keep it for a while longer. Next is the cold cranking amp setting, CCA, and this tells us the actual number of cold cranking amps the battery has available for use presently. Next time we go shopping for a marine battery, we're going to take this tester along with us. So when the guy who sells those brand X batteries tells us how many cold cranking amps his cheap battery has, we can keep him honest.
You know, boats don't start out like this. Usually they've got varnish on it that really gets bad first. What you've got to do then is you've got to get the old varnish off, and you've got to get the wood in shape before you can put new varnish on. So the first thing we did was, I shouldn't say we because Dave did the work, is we sanded off all the old varnish, scraped it off if it was below this area down here, depending on the shape of it. After that, sand it down with about 80 grit sandpaper. Then with 100, smooth it out a little further, fill in all the missing plugs, the bungs that are out, and next thing we do is after it's ready, we have to seal it up. The first thing we do is get our brush and put a thin coat of varnish on, just as a sealer coat.
For demonstration purposes, we took this brand new piece of teak plywood and thought we'd put it through the paces all the way from fresh bare plywood through to about 8 or 10 coats of varnish. It's very important with wood to know before you start sanding whether you've got veneer on plywood like this is or whether you've got a solid piece of wood. The main difference being is if it's veneer, it's only got a thin coat of the teak on top of it. And if you sand too hard, you run the danger of going right through it with the sandpaper. Once it's sanded good on top, you've got to get the sawdust off. The best thing for this is a tack cloth. Just rub it very thoroughly and make sure every last piece of dust is lifted off, because if the dust is on while you're varnishing, you're going to have some bumps that you're not going to be happy with in the future. When we put a first coat of varnish on, we like to mix it with some thinner to thin it out a little bit. It'll dry a little faster and soak deeper into the wood. We use quick dry varnish for the build-up coats and find that once the sealer is put on, you can put a maximum of about 2 or 3 coats on in a day. If the sun is shining, it's nice and warm and it's not too humid outside. After the first day or two and the first 3 or 6 coats are put on, then you're going to have to sand slightly in between. What you're actually doing sanding in between is rubbing off the high spots of the varnish and giving yourself a chance to fill in the low spots. That's what gives it the real glassy finish. Don't forget the tack. When you put the finish coats on, you may only be able to put 1 coat on a day. I know it sounds like a lot of work, but boy, when it's done, it's worth it. If you've got a sailboat that's any longer than about 12 feet, you've probably got a couple of winches on board. They usually require less maintenance than other parts on the outside of your boat because they don't need varnishing or waxing. But when one of them does require maintenance, you should know how to break it down and reassemble it. To start off, Pierre uses a special tool that's required to remove the first screw.
I say when you buy a winch, these 2 little tools come with it to take them apart. Be careful not to lose the bearings. It's supposed to be 2 here.
Servicing the winch is easy, just oiling and greasing the parts. It's getting the darn thing apart and back together again. That's where you can get into trouble. Most winch problems can be attributed to the spring-loaded pawls. Those are the little things that give the winch its ratchet action. Once the cover plate is removed, you'll see the first set of pawls. Try to hold them in place with your thumbs while you remove the drum. That way they won't pop out and disappear. Once you've got them out, check the edges of each pawl. If they're cracked or chipped, replace them. Try out the little springs too. They should offer some resistance when pressed between your 2 fingers. Also, be careful not to drop the bearings. They're held in place by a delicate cage that's easily distorted. You'll find another set of pawls and springs in the winch base. Remove and inspect them too. The servicing procedure is really quite simple. Inspect the parts for any cracks and chips. Replace any damaged parts. Clean off salt and old lubricants. Apply new grease and oil, and then try to get the winch back together again. While Pierre finishes this one up, here are some do's and don'ts to keep in mind. Don't grease the pawls. All they require is a little machine oil, like WD-40. Don't use gasoline as a cleaning agent. It's too explosive. Use either kerosene or diesel. Do try to obtain a repair kit from the manufacturer in case you have to replace pawls or pawl springs. Do put a light film of winch grease on the bearings and the gears. And last but not least, don't hurry. This is a delicate job that's not too difficult if you take your time and do it right.
You know, a lot of people seem to ignore the top of their saloon deck roof. And I think the proper pronunciation is saloon if you're talking about the inside of a boat. They usually leave it shiny and just paint it, and sometimes they even wax it. They think it looks prettier. And it may look prettier, but it's really dangerous, because if you ever have to come up here for any reason while the boat's underway, you're going to slide all over. A lot of times people will want to get up on top of your roof here to get a little sunbathing done. So the best thing we suggest is rough it up and get some non-skid down. So it'll keep your cushions in place and keep your people in place. Don't forget the priorities. Keep the people on the boat and the water out of it. You know, lifelines have to be taken care of too. As you can see, these are really shot. I don't know if the cable's gone, but you can tell the plastic, the vinyl coating is, so this will have to be replaced. Another thing, if you remember from our cruising guide tape, the stanchion posts should all be bolted through. You should check those. We've loosened up this screw here. Let's see if it's through bolted or just screwed into the wood. And the answer is just a wood screw. Well, we'll have to remedy that. So these will all come off, and we'll through bolt all the way through the deck to make sure these are in place properly. I hope by now you realize that no matter what size boat you've got, even if it's like the Queen Mary or like Mr. Cousteau's boat over here, you've got to do your routine maintenance. There's no way to avoid it. You can take the ostrich approach and cover it up completely. Well, just because you can't see that salt air doesn't mean that salt air can't get to your boat. Some people even try to lift their boat out of the water with a lift, a hydro lift. Well, that'll help a little, keep the barnacles off the bottom, but you've still got to have a routine monthly maintenance checklist that you go over. In fact, if you don't have one, drop us a line and we'll be glad to send you a copy of ours. But we suggest that once a month, start out right at the dock where the boat's attached. Go to your dock line, check and see if it's chafed, especially where it ties up around the cleat or where it goes through the chock on your boat, or if it goes through a block or anywhere on your tow rail. That's the first place it usually goes. You can spot it chafing. If it's chafing, watch out. Tape it up if it's not chafed too badly, or get a piece of garden hose, cut a slice of it and put it around there. It'll stop the chafing. Best way to stop chafing, because if one of your lines goes, so goes your boat. Speaking of lines, we've also got our power line, our phone line, and our water line. First thing with your power lines is check to see if there's any corrosion, either where it's plugged in at the dock or where it's plugged in at the boat, or if you've got any scrapes or cuts or there's any breaks in the line along the way where moisture can get in. After that, check your phone line. And if you've got water tied up to your dock and piped right into your boat, get one of those little pressure regulators. It's like a governor. It stops the water from coming in any more than around 14 or 15 pounds per square inch, and it won't rupture your lines, your plumbing inside the boat, because if that happens and the faucet's on outside the boat, well, in no time at all, I think it's going to overcome your bilge pump. And speaking of bilge pumps, get down to the bilge, check for oil leakage, and if you find any oil that's leaked from your engine or from a filter or from a hose and it's in your bilge, for goodness sakes, do not pump it out, because it's a bad thing to do. It causes pollution in the water, and aside from that, it's against the law and you're subject to a very big fine. So if you've got some oil down there, try to siphon it out, use some absorbent, something like Ron used when he cleaned out the bilge. They've got some products, one of them's called Oil Zorb, and otherwise you can just use some sanitary napkins. That gets it good too. But don't pump it overboard. And while you're down there, check your float switch. Just put your finger underneath it and lift it up and see if your bilge pump goes on. And check the hose clamps around the bilge pumps too. They should be double hose clamps, and make sure that there's no rust on them. I hope they're all stainless steel all the way through. And you've got limber holes, and you should, through the bulkheads as they go through the boat fore and aft. Check your limber holes and make sure they're all cleared up. As you saw Mike Bennett show when we inspected the keel boats on that sailboat, you want to see if there's a chain going through or run a string through, because if you keep those holes clean, at least the water can go through the boat fore and aft and won't collect by one of the bulkheads. And if you've got an emergency bilge pump, a manual, and I certainly hope you've got one, work it. Pump it back and forth. Make sure it's operating. And like everything else, check the hoses and check the hose clamps on the bilge pump. Get down to your through holes. Work every one of them. They should have seacocks on them, as we explained to you earlier. Turn it on, turn it off. Make sure it's the way it's supposed to be. Make sure the double hose clamps are on it, especially if it's below the water line, and squeeze and bend all the hoses and replace them if any cracks appear. Don't forget, if you're going to replace the hose, turn off that seacock before you release those hose clamps and take the hose off, and keep a little bucket around to get that residue of the water. Check your filters too. Check your inlet strainers on the head, like Tom showed us. Check your raw water strainer. Check your diesel or your gas or your water separation filters if you've got one. I think Raycor's a pretty popular one. If you've got a diesel engine, I think they make them for gas also. Check your oil and your fuel filters for sediments and replace them if necessary. Always, every time, check those hose clamps. Your electrical system is important too. Of course, all of the parts of your boat are important, but make sure all your electronics are stored in a dry place. If you've got a VHF or a LoRaN or a radar and it's not going to be used while you're not using the boat, unscrew it, unfasten it from wherever it is, on the bridge or the command bridge. You can also protect against theft, but assuming you're in a nice place anyway, at least get it down below deck somewhere. Put it in some sort of case or a box and keep it away from the weather. And don't cover it with a terry cloth towel, because those terry cloth towels absorb the moisture and it'll dump it right on top of your item. And while you're at it, you've got your panel in your boat. Flick your switches. If you don't have anybody with you, just run up on deck, check your running lights, make sure they work. Check your bow light, your stern light, your anchor light, all the accessories on board. Inspect the back of the panel for corrosion. Make sure there's nothing wrong back there. A lot of times when your engine's on, the vibration will loosen up your connection, so you have to watch out for vibration loosening. Check your radio too, but do not use channel 16 for a radio check. That's against the law. That's the emergency channel. Now, usually wherever you are, you check with your marine radio guide. There'll be a working channel, maybe channel 12 that the local people use, or there's a local communications channel, a radio telephone channel for the marine operator, 26 in our area, or there's the ship-to-ship channels, the 68 and 70. If you check around, you can usually find some conversation. Check your batteries periodically. You know, a lot of people leave their battery charger on and think, oh, well, I've got no problem. I've got an automatic battery charger. Well, that's not good enough, because that's going to cook the fluid in the battery, and you've got to check to make sure it doesn't get run down. Check it. Don't forget. Use your safety goggles if you're going to fill it, so you don't get any acid splash in your eyes. Fill it only up to where you're supposed to fill it, and only use distilled water. Check all of your plumbed items, too. Go to every faucet and turn it on, even the ones in the showers. Go to your head. Work the head. Just pump it back and forth. Make sure it's running. Check your shower too. Check all the hose clamps, and you should have a manual galley pump, because if you ever have an electrical failure and you can't get your water out of your tanks, it's going to be water all around and not a drop to drink. So give it a check, see if it works. Start your engine up. Run it for about 15 minutes. You don't want to turn it on and then turn it off real quick. Give it a chance to warm up a little. See if the water is exhausting in the back. Check your oil lever, your oil pressure. Check your fuel and your coolant levels. Check all your hoses. Don't forget, check those clamps and check those belts. On the cosmetics, well, about all you can do there is a visual check. Just take a look at your varnish. If necessary, scratch it off a little. If every couple of months goes by and you need it, and put on a little coat. It's going to keep looking good if you do that. Also, look at your fiberglass for any bubbles or cracks. You know, repairing fiberglass is a little beyond the scope of this tape, but you ought to check to see if you've got any problems anyway. A lot of times, gel coats can really bubble up on you. Also, if you've got a wood boat or any wood around your windows, that's a very notorious place for rot to collect. So if you get an ice pick, just poke around and check a little. And if you find something soft, don't take that ice pick after a soft, rotted spot and stick it in a good piece of wood, because what you'll be doing is transferring the fungus like a bee goes from flower to flower. Inspect your fiberglass for oxidation, wax it out if necessary, and inspect your wood for rot and fix that if necessary. Depending on what type of steering you have on the boat, well, if you've got a tiller, about all you've got to do is inspect your pintle and your gudgeon and make sure everything's fitting properly. Those are the things that hold the rudder together with your steering post. If you have a wheel or pedestal steering, then you'll want to check your cables or your hydraulics, depending on what you've got. But most people have cables, so make sure that your cable clamps are okay, that there's no frays in your wire. And if you've got a wheel steering, get your emergency tiller out once in a while. Check it. Install it, give it a twist, make sure it turns the rudder. And for goodness sake, don't hide it somewhere where you can't get at it, because when you need it, boy, you need it. Of course, there's the miscellaneous things too. I would suggest there, check the last thing that gave you trouble. Make sure it's not going to give you trouble again in the near future, and make sure your tools are aboard before you get away. You should carry spare parts. If you don't have any, you should take a look at our cruising guide tape. We've even got a list of emergency spare parts you should carry with you. Your bottom's important too. Of course, it might be difficult for you to get down there if your boat's not on one of those lifts, but sometimes there are these divers that work in the marinas that check the bottoms of boats each month. They'll get down there and they'll leave a report for you each month as they scrape off your bottom as to what the condition is of your zinc, of your shafts, and of your paint and your through hulls.
Of course, if you've got a bolt-on keel, you want to get inside like you saw Mike Bennett do and check those keel bolts. And if your boat has any special problem areas, well, you've got to get those things too. Of course, you know your boat better than anyone else does, so if you've got a problem area, you know where it is, check it out. And keep checking, because routine maintenance is the only way to avoid those costly problems that can not only ruin a good day, but can also ruin your monthly boating budget. Thank you for watching our program on maintenance today. We'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the people who helped us complete this project, especially Mike Bennett and Tom Kirkpatrick for their assistance with marine heads and water pumps, King Harbor Marine, Dave Harder, the varnish doctor, Chuck Daly for letting us whitewash the bilge of his Chris craft, and also Pierre Helios for breaking down our main halyard winch. If you'd like to review other topics on boating, Magic Lamp Productions is the world's largest independent producer of educational videos for the boating public, and our tapes on coastal piloting, celestial navigation, marine electronics, and offshore cruising have become the standards of learning for both powerboat and sailboat enthusiasts. So watch for our new upcoming programs, keep on boating, and remember our favorite saying, safe boating is no accident.